The air in courtroom 3B was so thick with tension you could smell it, a toxic mix of old money, expensive perfume, and pure, unfiltered hatred. On one side sat Isabella Rodriguez, the socialite mistress, draped in a black designer veil, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her flawless skin. On the other, tucked in the back like a forgotten coat, sat Ilara Vance. No veil, no designer label. Just a pole face, a threadbare cardigan, and the two silent ghosts of her 5-year-old twins waiting at home. This wasn't a trial. It was an execution. The reading of billionaire Richard Grayson's will. And Ilara, the wife he'd abandoned, wasn't supposed to be there. But she was. And when the judge finally unsealed the last document, what he read would make the mistress's perfect facade crack, crumble, and explode in a scream that would shatter the silence for good. 5 years. For 5 years, Ilara Vance had been a ghost. She had perfected the art of invisibility. She lived in a third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood Richard Grayson's limousine would have locked its doors driving through. Her world wasn't Grayson Global, or the Zurich galas, or the Hamptons weekends she saw splashed across tabloid covers featuring Richard and her. Bella. Ilara's world was the $1.99 price check on generic brand cereal. It was the rhythmic creak, creak, creak of the stroller, with the one wobbly wheel as she pushed Liam and Lily to the public park. It was the smell of disinfectant from her night job, scrubbing the floors of an office building she couldn't afford to work in during the day. Liam and Lily were her sun and moon. They had Richard's eyes, a piercing, intelligent sapphire blue. Liam had his quiet intensity, his brow furrowing as he meticulously built block towers. Lily had his charm, a dimpled smile that could coax an extra cookie from the stingiest neighbor. They were 5 years old, and they had never met their father. Ilara hadn't been abandoned in the traditional sense. There was no tearful confession over dinner. There was no, "I've met someone else." There was only the night. She remembered the screech of tires on the gravel of their Connecticut estate. Richard, his face paler than she'd ever seen it, bursting into their bedroom. He wasn't in his usual tailored suit. He was in a rumpled shirt, his tie undone, smelling of stale brandy and fear. "Pack!" "Now," he'd commanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Richard, what's wrong? You're scaring me." "Don't ask questions, Ilara. Just pack. A small bag. For you." "For me? What about you? What's going on?" He had gripped her shoulders, his fingers digging in. "You're leaving. Tonight. I've arranged everything. There's a car waiting." "I'm not." She had started, her hand instinctively going to her stomach, where the first secret flutters of life had just begun. She was pregnant. They'd been trying. "You are," he'd said, his voice breaking. He'd pulled out a checkbook. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely write. He tore off a check and threw it on the bed. "This will be enough. For a new start. Go somewhere I don't know. Change your name. Forget me. Forget you. Richard, I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air. The terror in his eyes was replaced by something colder. Despair. "Then you must go," he'd whispered. "They'll use you. They'll use it. Go. Now. If you ever loved me, Ilara, you would become a ghost." He had shoved her out the door, into the back of a black sedan. He kissed her, a hard, desperate kiss that tasted of salt and goodbyes. The last time she saw him, he was a silhouette on the porch of their $1 million home, watching her drive away. A week later, the first pictures of him with Isabella Bella Rodriguez appeared. He hadn't been running with her. He had been running from something, and he'd used Bella as his shield. The check he'd given her? She'd cashed just enough to get a bus ticket and rent a room. The rest, she'd torn up. She wasn't a payoff. Now he was dead. A tragic accident, the papers called it. His private helicopter, a state-of-the-art Sikorsky, had gone down in the Swiss Alps, the same Alps where he'd been entertaining the Zurich consortium he'd been so afraid of. The summons had arrived 2 days later, delivered by a stiff man in a suit who looked profoundly uncomfortable in her apartment building. It wasn't a request. It was a summons, a probate hearing for the estate of Richard Grayson III. Her name, Ilara Vance, was listed, not Ilara Grayson. She'd looked at Liam and Lily, asleep in their shared bunk bed, their faces soft in the glow of the dollar store nightlight. They deserved to know who they were. They deserved more than a mother who was a ghost. She'd found David Hayes through a legal aid clinic. He was young, earnest, and clearly terrified. His best suit was a size too large, and his briefcase was scuffed. "Mrs. Grayson. Ilara," he'd stuttered. "The Grayson estate. This is David versus Goliath. They have a team of lawyers. We have this." He'd gestured to his cramped office. "I am not Mrs. Grayson," Ilara had said, her voice quiet but firm. "I am Ilara Vance. But I am his wife. We were never divorced, and he is the father of my children. Do you have proof of the paternity?" Ilara had clutched the worn leather folder she'd brought. "I have something better. I have his proof." She'd bought a dress from a consignment shop. It was navy blue, modest, and cost $40. She'd ironed it twice. She put her hair in a simple, tight bun. She looked in the mirror. The ghost stared back. But today, the ghost was going to court. The Daniel Patrick Moynihan Courthouse was a monolith of marble and granite, a temple built to the god of law. Ilara felt like a sinner entering a church. The press was a wall of noise and flashing lights. They weren't there for her. They swarmed a black Escalade as it purred to the curb. The door opened, and a single, stiletto-heeled boot, black as night, emerged. Isabella Bella Rodriguez stepped out. She was a vision of perfect, tragic grief. A custom-made black dress that clung to her curves, a wide-brimmed hat with a delicate veil, and oversized sunglasses. She didn't walk. She glided, flanked by a phalanx of security and her lead counsel, the notoriously ruthless Arthur Shaw. Shaw was everything David Hayes was not. His suit was bespoke, his silver hair was perfect, his smile was a predator's. He guided Bella through the throng, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "No comments, please," he boomed. "My client is in mourning. We are here simply to execute Mr. Grayson's final wishes and honor his legacy." Ilara and David slipped in through a side entrance, unnoticed. Courtroom 3B was not a room. It was a cathedral of power. The walls were paneled in dark, rich mahogany. The ceilings were vaulted, and the air was heavy with the weight of a century of judgments. The Grayson family, or what remained of it, occupied the entire front row. Richard's sister, Caroline Grayson, sat ramrod straight, her face a mask of aristocratic disapproval. She looked at Bella with open contempt, and when her eyes briefly scanned the room and landed on Ilara, they registered nothing. Less than nothing. Ilara and David sat in the very back row. "Deep breaths, Ilara," David whispered, his own hand shaking as he fumbled with the latch on his briefcase. "We just state our case. We're on the docket. We have a right to be here. All rise." The command cut through the murmurs. Judge Marcus Cole entered. He was an older man, an African-American man, with a face carved from teak and eyes that had seen everything. He was not a judge who could be fooled, and Ilara felt a tiny, flickering ember of hope. "We are here," Judge Cole began, his voice a gravelly baritone that filled the room, For the probate hearing of the estate of Richard Grayson III, case number 719P, I see the petitioner, Ms. Isabella Rodriguez, represented by Mr. Arthur Shaw, and I see an interested party, Miss Ilara Vance, represented by Mr. David Hayes. You could feel the shift in the room. Who? Arthur Shaw turned his head, a look of mild annoyance on his face, as if a fly had buzzed into the room. Bella, behind her veil, didn't even move. Your Honor, Arthur Shaw said, rising smoothly. We are, of course, sympathetic to anyone from Mr. Grayson's past who may wish to pay their respects. However, this is a formal probate hearing. With all due respect to Miss Vance, whom my client has never met, we fail to see her standing in this matter. The word standing was an insult, a legal spike. It meant you do not belong here. Mr. Hayes, Judge Cole said, his eyes finding David in the back. David stood up. His voice cracked on the first word. Your Honor, my client, Ilara Vance, has standing. She is here to contest the will presented by the petitioner. She is what, Mr. Hayes? Shaw interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. A college girlfriend? A brief, regrettable marriage from a decade ago? Mr. Grayson's life was with my client for the past 5 years. The entire world knew her as Mrs. Grayson in waiting. Mr. Shaw, the judge warned, let Mr. Hayes speak. David swallowed. He looked at Ilara. She gave him a short, firm nod. He straightened his tie. Your Honor, David said, his voice clearer now. My client is not contesting the will as a former partner. She is here as Richard Grayson's legal wife. A gasp rippled through the press row. Bella's head snapped up. Caroline Grayson, in the front row, actually turned around. Arthur Shaw laughed. A short, barking sound. His wife? Your Honor, that's absurd. He abandoned her 5 years ago. Mr. Hayes, the judge said, ignoring Shaw. Do you have proof of this claim? A marriage that was never dissolved? I do, Your Honor, David said. He pulled a file from his briefcase. The marriage certificate, dated 10 years ago, and a state-issued search confirming no divorce was ever filed in any of the 50 states by either party. A technicality, Shaw bellowed, his face turning red. A piece of paper he clearly forgot about. He left her. He built a new life. Did he? David Hayes asked, a new, sharp edge to his voice. Or was he forced to? That is baseless speculation, Shaw spat. Is it? David countered. Or is it the truth? My client is here not just as his wife, but as the mother of his children. The room exploded. Order! Judge Cole's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Order in this court! Bella was on her feet, her veil askew. Children? What children? He couldn't have... We were trying. Arthur Shaw was pulling at her arm. Bella, sit down. Let me handle this. It's a lie, she shrieked, pointing a black-gloved finger at Ilara. A desperate, pathetic lie by a gold digger. Ilara sat still. She hadn't said a word. She just watched the woman who had lived her life unravel. Miss Rodriguez, you will sit down, or I will have you removed, Judge Cole commanded. Mr. Shaw, control your client. Bella sat, her chest heaving. The perfect mask was gone. Judge Cole looked at Ilara in the back row. His gaze was intense, searching. Miss Vance, you claim you have children. By Mr. Grayson. Ilara finally stood. Her voice was quiet, but it carried in the stunned silence. My children's names are Liam and Lily. They are 5 years old. And yes, Your Honor, they are his. Arthur Shaw was good. Ilara had to give him that. He was a master showman. After the explosive revelation of the twins, Judge Cole had called a brief recess, and now Shaw was back on the offensive. He had reset his client, who was now sitting silently, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Your Honor, members of the Grayson family, Shaw began, his voice resonating with false sympathy. Please forgive Ms. Rodriguez's outburst. She is a woman grieving the love of her life, who is now being sullied by these opportunistic and fantastical claims. He paced in front of the judge's bench, a lion in his cage. Let's speak of facts, he said, tapping a polished finger on a thick, leather-bound document. Not fantasy. The fact is, for the past 24 months, Richard Grayson's wishes were clear. He had a will, a clear, legally executed and notarized will, drafted by my firm. He placed it on the dais. I am presenting the last will and testament of Richard Grayson III, dated 2 years ago. It is simple, clear, and direct. Judge Cole picked it up. The court recognizes this document. It was filed this morning. In it, Shaw continued, turning to face the gallery, Mr. Grayson leaves a few token bequests to his alma mater and a small foundation. But the bulk, the entirety of his personal estate and his controlling interest in Grayson Global, he leaves to one person. He paused for dramatic effect. To my partner, my rock, and the woman who saved my life, Isabella Rodriguez. Another murmur. Bella let out a small, artful sob. This, Shaw declared, is the will of a man in full command of his faculties, a man in love, a man who knew what he wanted. He named Ms. Rodriguez as his sole beneficiary. He named her as the executrix of his estate. He then turned his gaze like a weapon on Elara. This document revokes all previous wills. Even if Ms. Vance is technically, on some dusty piece of paper, still his wife, a marriage he clearly ran from, this will disinherit her. In this state, you can disinherit a spouse. And that is exactly what Richard Grayson did. He smiled, a thin, triumphant smile. As for the other claim, he said, the word children dripping with sarcasm. We see no proof, no evidence, just a desperate woman's word. Where are these children? Why in 5 years did she never seek child support? Why in 5 years did she never contact Mr. Grayson? Because he told her not to, David Hayes shot back, jumping to his feet. So you say, Shaw snapped. It's all hearsay. What we have is a document. What they have is a story, a fairy tale. Your Honor, we ask that the court validate the will dated 2 years prior and dismiss Miss Vance's claim entirely. The room was suffocating. Elara felt the weight of every eye on her. They all believed him. It was logical. It made sense. A rich man leaves his wife for a beautiful mistress. It was a story as old as time. Her story. The one of a secret threat, a forced disappearance, a husband living a lie to protect her, sounded insane. Judge Cole looked at the will. He looked at Shaw. Then he looked back at David Hayes. Mr. Hayes, Mr. Shaw makes a powerful argument. This will seem ironclad. It explicitly disinherits any and all other parties, known or unknown, past or present. That would seem to include your client. David's face was pale. This was the moment. Your Honor, David said, his voice trembling slightly. We are not arguing that will. We are here to present another will. Shaw scoffed. Another will? A forgery, no doubt. No, sir, David said, holding up a single sealed envelope. Not a forgery. A holographic will, written entirely in Mr. Grayson's own hand, and dated. Dated when? The judge asked, leaning forward. Dated 6 months ago, Your Honor. Long after Mr. Shaw's ironclad document. The courtroom inhaled as one. That's impossible, Shaw blurted. Richard wouldn't. He would have come to me. Perhaps, David said, finding his footing. He didn't want you to know. He didn't want anyone to know. He gave this to my client by courier 5 years ago, with explicit instructions." "What instructions?" Judge Cole asked. "That it was not to be opened, that it was only to be filed with the court in the event of his death. It is, by all definitions, his final testament, superseding the one Mr. Shaw has presented." "Let me see that," the judge ordered. The bailiff took the envelope from David's shaking hand and delivered it. Judge Cole examined the seal. He examined the handwriting on the front, which read, "To be opened by a probate judge only. ATTN, Marcus Cole." The judge's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He and Richard Grayson had been friends. Old money, old favors. "See you at the club, friends." "This is highly irregular," Shaw protested, his voice now laced with panic. "How do we know she didn't write that? How do we know it's not a fake?" "Because, Mr. Shaw," Judge Cole said, his voice dropping, "I recognize the handwriting, and the seal is from his private bank in Geneva. This is authentic." He took a letter opener and slit the envelope. Bella was no longer crying. She was leaning forward, her hands gripping the railing, her knuckles white. "What's in it?" she hissed. "Arthur, what does it say?" Judge Cole pulled out a single sheet of paper, handwritten. He read it to himself first. The room was so quiet, Elara could hear the frantic ticking of the clock on the wall. The judge's expression was unreadable. He looked up, first at Shaw, then at Bella, and finally at Elara. "Mr. Shaw," the judge said, "you may want to sit down." "A holographic will," Judge Cole announced to the stunned courtroom, "is a will and testament that has been written entirely in the handwriting of the person whose signature it bears. In this state, and given the clear provenance of this document from Mr. Grayson's Swiss vault, it is valid." Arthur Shaw was sputtering. But, the contents, Your Honor, surely a will drafted by a legal team, properly witnessed, is superseded by a more recent testament, Mr. Shaw. That is the law. The most recent, validly executed will is the one that stands. Judge Cole cleared his throat. He put on a pair of reading glasses and looked at the sheet of paper. "I will read the contents aloud," he said. The press was in a frenzy. Reporters were typing so fast on their phones, their thumbs were blurring. The judge began to read. "I, Richard Grayson III, being of sound mind and body, do write this, my true and final testament." "He begins with a personal note," the judge said, looking over his glasses. "It appears to be addressed to the court. Specifically, to me." He read, "Marcus, if you are reading this, I am gone. And I am sorry to put you in this position, my old friend. But you were the only one I could trust to see this through. The last 5 years of my life have been a performance, a lie." Bella made a small, choking sound. "I was not threatened by business rivals," the judge continued to read. "I was being extorted. The Zurich Consortium I was so desperate to appease was, in fact, run by the Bastian family. The same people my father nearly ruined, the same people who swore a blood feud against him. When my father died, the debt fell to me." Caroline Grayson in the front row let out a choked cry and covered her mouth. This was family history, dirty laundry. They didn't want money. They wanted my submission. They wanted me to be their public face, to launder their reputation. And they knew I would do anything, because they knew my one weakness. The judge's eyes scanned the page and then lifted, finding Elara in the back row. "My wife, Elara." Elara's hand flew to her mouth. David Hayes put a supportive hand on her arm. "They gave me an ultimatum," the judge read, his voice heavy. "Cut her loose, publicly, humiliatingly, or they would cut her loose for me. They knew she was pregnant before I did. They had pictures. They were going to make it look like an accident. The courtroom was frozen. This wasn't a will. It was a confession. So I did what I had to do. I terrified her. I pushed her away. I threw money at her, hoping she would hate me enough to disappear. Thank God she did. She vanished. She became the ghost I needed her to be to stay alive. Ilara was openly weeping now, quiet, racking sobs. He hadn't abandoned her. He had saved her. And then, the judge continued, I needed a shield, a buffer. Someone so high profile, so demanding, so public, that the Bastian family would believe I had moved on. Someone they could watch. Someone who, if I'm honest, was part of their world, not mine. The judge paused. He looked directly at Bella Rodriguez. Isabella Rodriguez was a contractual arrangement. She was a necessary fiction. She was, in short, my jailer. She reported my every move to the Bastian family in exchange for the life she always wanted. She was not my partner. She was my handler. Lies! Bella screamed, lunging forward. Lies! He loved me! He loved me! Tell them, Arthur! Tell them the lies! Miss Rodriguez, I will have you gagged! Judge Cole roared. The gavel slammed down. Bailiff, restrain her! 2 officers moved towards Bella, who shrank back into her seat, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Arthur Shaw looked like he had seen a ghost. His multi-million-dollar client was not a grieving lover. She was a co-conspirator, a spy. This is slander, Shaw stammered. You can't slander the dead. Mr. Grayson is doing no such thing, the judge said coldly. He is explaining his motive, which leads to his request. And Mr. Shaw, he has provided proof. Judge Cole lifted a second, smaller envelope from the main one. A USB drive, with, I can only assume, the evidence to support these claims. Financial records, most likely. He then turned back to the letter. Isabella Rodriguez has been well compensated for her services. A trust fund in the Cayman Islands, set up by the Bastian family, has been funding her lifestyle for 5 years. That is her full and final payment. She is to receive nothing from my estate, not $1. Bella's face went from red to a terrifying, waxy white. This leads me to my children, the judge read, his voice softening. The silence in the room was absolute. It was no longer a courtroom. It was a tomb, and Richard Grayson was speaking from beyond it. My children, Judge Cole read, his voice steady. Ilara was pregnant when I sent her away. I didn't know it was twins. Ilara gasped, her hand clutching the worn leather folder on her lap. How could he have known? I hired a man, the judge read on, a private investigator. Not to find her, I couldn't risk that, but to watch for her. To find a woman fitting her description, who had paid for a bus ticket with a check from my bank, who had disappeared. It took him 2 years. He found her. He found them, Liam and Lily. Ilara was shaking her head in disbelief. She had been so careful, so invisible. I have seen pictures, Richard's voice continued through the judge. I have seen them in the park. I have seen them holding her hand. They have my eyes. They are beautiful. And I have never been able to hold them. A tear rolled down Judge Cole's cheek. He took off his glasses and wiped it away, unapologetically. Forgive me, he murmured, before continuing. Ilara, my Ilara. If you are hearing this, it means I am gone. But it also means the threat is over. My death, I have arranged for it to be a trigger. The moment my death was confirmed, the evidence I've collected on the Bastian family and their Zurich consortium was delivered to Interpol, the SEC, and the Department of Justice. By the time this will is read, they are finished. Their empire will be in ashes. It was the only way out. For you. For us. It was a dead man's switch. He had sacrificed himself to free his family. And so, the judge's voice became formal again. I, Richard Grayson III, being of sound mind, do hereby revoke all previous wills, testaments, and declarations. They were fictions, written under duress. This is the only truth. I bequeath my entire estate, my personal property, my holdings, and my controlling interest in Grayson Global to be held in trust. Arthur Shaw leaned forward. A trust? For whom? He whispered, a last thread of hope. This trust, the judge read, is to be executed for the sole benefit of my children, Liam Grayson and Lily Grayson. The names hit the room like bullets. They were real. They were named. This trust will be managed by... The judge paused, and a small, sad smile touched his lips. Their mother, and my one, true wife, Elara Vance Grayson. No, Bella whispered. It was a dry, rasping sound. No. Elara is to be given full control of the trust, full voting rights on the board of Grayson Global, and immediate access to all personal funds, homes, and properties. She is the sole executrix of my estate. She is the head of my family. She will raise my children in the safety I bought with my life. This is my will. This is my final word. The judge finished reading. He carefully folded the letter. The room was silent. And then Arthur Shaw, in a desperate, last-ditch effort, leapt to his feet. "Objection!" he roared. "Objection! This is a farce!" "On what grounds, Mr. Shaw?" Judge Cole asked, his voice lethally calm. "On the grounds of proof. He admits he never met them. He saw pictures. We have no proof those children are his. This is a multi-billion-dollar estate. We can't just hand it over to a stranger, based on a dead man's hope. We demand a DNA test." Bella's head snapped up. A predatory gleam returned to her eye. Yes, DNA. The one thing they couldn't fake. The one thing Richard, being dead, couldn't provide. "Mr. Shaw is right, Your Honor," Bella said, her voice a poisonous purr. "How do we know who she was with in those 5 years? A woman alone. She must have had needs. Prove they are Graysons." Elara locked eyes with Bella. The hatred in the room was so cold it burned. "Mr. Hayes," the judge asked, "the issue of paternity has been raised." David Hayes stood. He was no longer the nervous, fumbling legal aid. He was a giant slayer. "Your Honor," David said, his voice clear and confident. "My client was prepared for this, as, it seems, was Mr. Grayson." He tapped the worn leather folder Elara had been clutching. "What is that, Mr. Hayes?" "It's the one thing Mr. Grayson sent my client, other than the will. It was delivered by his personal physician, Dr. Alan Faces, 3 years ago. She was instructed to bring it to this hearing, unopened." David Hayes walked forward and handed the folder to the judge. "What is it?" Shaw demanded. "It appears," Judge Cole said, opening the folder and pulling out a thick, sealed document, to be a full, notarized and court-admissible paternity report. "What? How?" Shaw looked baffled. "It seems," the judge said, reading the attached letter from the doctor, "that Mr. Grayson's investigator, while observing the children, was able to retrieve discarded genetic material. A sippy cup from a park trash bin, a Band-Aid. Dr. Faces himself flew to the lab, collected the samples, and ran them against Moring's own DNA on file at his private clinic." Judge Cole held up the report. "The results are conclusive. The probability of paternity for both Liam and Lily is 99.999%. He looked at Arthur Shaw. Your demand for a DNA test has been met, Mr. Shaw, 3 years ago. The checkmate was absolute. It wasn't just a loss for Bella. It was a total, systematic annihilation. Arthur Shaw's face, normally so smug and ruddy, had turned the color of ash. He was looking at his client, Bella, not with sympathy, but with the cold, hard realization of a man who had just been publicly tied to a massive, international criminal conspiracy. His career wasn't just over. It was incinerated. I, he stammered, shuffling his papers, looking for an escape, a loophole, a motion. But there was none. The court is satisfied, Judge Cole declared, his voice a final judgment. The holographic will of Richard Grayson III, dated 6 months prior to his death, is hereby validated as his final testament. The will presented by Mr. Shaw, dated 2 years prior, is declared null and void. He looked at Bella. Ms. Rodriguez, your petition is dismissed, with prejudice. I would also advise you, Ms. Rodriguez, not to leave the jurisdiction. I have a feeling the U.S. Attorney's Office, upon receiving a copy of this USB drive, will have questions. That was it. The final nail. Bella Rodriguez had been sitting frozen, a perfect porcelain doll of horror. But the judge's last words, U.S. Attorney, seemed to flip a switch. She stood up. Slowly. She didn't look at the judge. She didn't look at Arthur Shaw. She didn't look at the stunned Grayson family. She looked at Ilara. Her perfectly manicured hand, the one with the massive blood diamond Richard hadn't given her, rose. It pointed, shaking, across the courtroom, directly at the woman in the $40 dress. You, Bella's voice was a low, guttural hiss. You. A ghost. You were nothing. Ilara met her gaze, unflinching. She felt no fear. She felt no anger. She felt pity. He told me you were dead. Bella's voice was rising, cracking. He said you were a mistake, a starter wife. He promised me the world. Ms. Rodriguez, you will be silent, the judge warned. But Bella was past listening. The illusion that had been her entire life, the money, the fame, the power, the love she thought she'd won, was revealed as a cheap, hollow stage play. She was not the star. She was the paid prop. It's mine, she shrieked. It wasn't a yell. It was a scream, a primal, guttural, stomach-churning sound of a soul being torn apart. It was the sound of complete and total psychological collapse. He promised me. It's mine. It's all mine. It's mine. The scream echoed off the high ceilings, the marble floors, the mahogany walls. It was a sound so raw, so full of rage and loss that every person in the room cringed. The press, who had been capturing every second, lowered their cameras, momentarily stunned. Caroline Grayson, who had despised Bella, looked frightened. Bella clawed at her own veil, ripping it from her hat. Her perfect hair came undone, and she looked wild, her eyes wide, her mascara, the non-waterproof kind, for the cameras, running in black rivers down her face. You can't have it! I won! I was the one there! She collapsed, not in a delicate faint, but in a heap, her body convulsing with sobs that were more like animalistic barks. Bailiffs, Judge Cole said, his voice grim. Get her out of here, and get her a medic. 2 officers and a startled-looking Arthur Shaw rushed to her. They lifted her, and she went limp, all the fight gone, just a broken, sobbing woman being dragged out of a courtroom that was, and always had been, Ilara's. As she was being pulled through the doors, she looked over her shoulder one last time at Ilara. Her eyes were no longer full of hate. They were just empty. The room was left in the ringing silence of the scream's aftermath. Judge Cole looked at Elara. He looked at the woman who had walked in as a ghost and was now, arguably, one of the most powerful women in the city. "Mrs. Grayson," he said, the Mrs. hitting her like a physical force. "The court recognizes your claim. The Grayson estate is yours. This court is adjourned." He banged the gavel. The final definitive crack of Judge Cole's gavel was not just a sound. It was a physical event. It was the sound of a universe breaking apart and reforming in a new, terrifying and unfamiliar shape. It was the sound that ended one life and began another. Elara Grayson, remained seated. The courtroom, which seconds before had been vibrating with the phantom echo of Bella's scream, was now a vacuum. The air had been sucked out. Then it returned in a roar. The press, held back by the bailiffs until the final gavel, exploded. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open, and a tsunami of bodies, cameras, and microphones surged forward. The sound was deafening, a chaotic, percussive roar of 100 shouted questions and the high-speed click, click, click of camera shutters that sounded like 1,000,000 angry insects. "Mrs. Grayson, Elara, over here. What will you do with Grayson Global? How does it feel to be a billionaire? Will you be suing the Bastian family?" Elara flinched. It was a small, involuntary movement, but it was real. For 5 years, her entire existence had been a study in invisibility. She was the woman people looked through, the woman who blended into the linoleum of the hallways she scrubbed. To be the center, the burning, white-hot focal point of all this energy, was a physical assault. David Hayes, his face pale and slick with a sweat of pure, unadulterated shock, grabbed her arm. "Elara, we have to go. We have to move." He was no longer a giant slayer. He was a young lawyer in a rumpled suit, holding a scuffed briefcase, who had just accidentally toppled an empire. He looked as terrified as she felt. Just stand up. Walk. Don't look at them," he stammered, pulling her to her feet. She stood, her legs as unsteady as a newborn fawn's. Her hand, worn and chapped from bleach and dish soap, instinctively clutched the thin strap of her $40 consignment shop purse. She looked at the horde. They weren't people. They were a wall of flashing lights and gaping mouths. She was blind. She was deaf. She was numb. Richard's words were swirling in her head, a chaotic loop from the will. My one, true wife. To protect her. A ghost I needed her to be. Liam and Lily. The grief which she had held at bay for days, which she had suppressed for 5 years, suddenly punched her in the solar plexus. He was gone. He was truly, irrevocably gone. He hadn't abandoned her. He had loved her. He had loved her so much he had orchestrated his own death, his own public lie, to save her. To save them. And she had never gotten to say goodbye. She had never gotten to tell him about the twins. A tear, hot and sharp, welled in her eye. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She would not give them that. She blinked it back, and in that instant her vision cleared. The numbness receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. A figure stepped in front of her, blocking her path. The press fell momentarily silent, sensing a new, even more compelling drama. It was Caroline Grayson. Richard's sister stood ramrod straight, a pillar of old money, aristocratic ice. Her black, perfectly tailored Chanel suit was immaculate. Her silver hair was a flawless helmet. Her face was a mask of proud, pained composure, her own eyes red-rimmed. She had just learned her entire family's honor had been a lie, and that her brother had been a prisoner. She looked at Elara. It was the first time she had ever truly looked at her. Before, Elara had been in a brief, unsuitable marriage, a starter wife, as Bella had so cruelly put it. Now Elara was something else. "Mrs. Grayson," Caroline said. Her voice was crisp, formal, but the ice had a hairline crack in it. The use of the name was deliberate. It was an acknowledgement, a coronation. Elara simply met her gaze, waiting. Caroline swallowed, her throat working. "I wish to offer an apology." This from Grayson was the equivalent of a state surrender. The reporter's microphone strained closer, capturing every syllable. "I misjudged you," Caroline said, her voice dropping lower. "I misjudged my brother. What he did, the life he lived. I thought it was arrogance. I thought it was him." She looked away at the judge's empty bench. "I found out today that he was a braver man than our father ever was, and he chose a braver woman." She turned back, her eyes locking with Elara's. "You protected them. You raised them. Alone. In poverty. You could have come forward. You could have demanded, but you didn't. You honored his wish. You protected the lineage." The lineage. Elara understood. This wasn't just about family. To Caroline, this was about legacy, about the future of the Grayson name, which now rested entirely on the shoulders of two 5-year-olds playing with blocks in a public preschool. "He did it for his children," Elara said, her first words since the gavel had fallen. Her voice was quiet, but it was not weak. Caroline's composure broke. A single tear tracked down her powdered cheek. "Yes," she whispered. "He did." She stepped closer, a shocking, intimate gesture. "They will try to tear you apart," she hissed, her gaze flicking to the press. "The board, the partners, the vultures. They will see a woman in a cardigan and think you are weak. They will try to take it from you." Elara felt a cold chill. She hadn't even considered that. The will was just the first battle. "You are not alone," Caroline stated. It wasn't an offer. It was a fact. "The family, my resources, my lawyers, are at your disposal. We will stand with you." "Thank you, Caroline," Elara said. "No," Caroline replied, a flicker of a sad smile playing on her lips. "Thank you, Elara. Welcome home." With that, Caroline Grayson turned, a general falling into rank. She nodded to David Hayes, who looked like he might faint. "Mr. Hayes, you've done a remarkable service. Now shall we escort Mrs. Grayson from this circus?" Caroline's own security detail. 2 large men in dark suits materialized, flanking Elara and David. They formed a moving wedge, parting the sea of press. "Mrs. Grayson, what is the family's position?" one reporter yelled at Caroline. Caroline didn't break stride. "The family's position is one of profound gratitude to my sister-in-law, who has endured the unendurable to protect the Grayson legacy. All further inquiries will be directed to my office. Now get out of our way." The last 3 words were spoken with a quiet authority that made the press physically recoil. They were through. They burst out of the courthouse's grand entrance onto the wide marble steps, into the cold, bright October afternoon. The city air was a shock. It smelled of street-cart pretzels, exhaust fumes, and freedom. The sounds of sirens and traffic were a welcome relief from the pressurized silence and sudden chaos of the courtroom. Elara took a deep, shuddering breath. It was the first real breath she'd taken all day. "Elara," David said, his voice giddy. "We did it. My God, Elara, we did it. You're safe. The children are safe. You own everything." Elara barely heard him. She was looking at the clock tower across the square. 2:50 p.m. Her heart lurched. 3:15 p.m. "I have to go," she said, a sudden urgency in her voice. "It's all arranged, Mrs. Grayson," a new voice said. A man Ilara hadn't noticed before stepped out from behind a granite pillar. He was in his 50s, with a calm, capable face and the quiet presence of a man who sees everything. His suit was impeccably tailored. He looked like what Arthur Shaw tried to be. "My name is Thomas Harrison," he said, giving a slight, respectful bow of his head. "I was Mr. Grayson's head of personal affairs and security. I am now, if you will have me, at your disposal." He gestured to the curb. There, purring at the bottom of the steps, was a car. It wasn't a car. It was a statement, a deep, shining black Bentley Mulsanne, so polished it looked like a pool of liquid night. It was a land yacht, a fortress on wheels. The license plate was simple. Grayson 1. A uniformed driver stood by the open rear door. "Mr. Harrison will take you wherever you need to go, Ilara," Caroline said, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "You're safe now. This is your new life." This was it. The moment. The pivot. Ilara looked at the car. She saw the impossibly thick, tinted windows. She saw the luxurious, beige leather interior. She saw the driver, waiting to close her in, and all she could see was the black sedan that had taken her away 5 years ago. A different car, a different man, but the same idea. A beautiful, expensive cage. "Ilara, what's wrong?" David asked, seeing her hesitate. "Get in, this is it, this is yours." Ilara looked at the Bentley, then she looked at the street, at the river of yellow cabs, delivery trucks, and city buses. She shook her head. "No," she said. Harrison, for the first time, looked confused. "Ma'am, I assure you the vehicle is secure. It's fully armored." "No," Ilara said again, her voice firmer. She turned to Harrison, and for the first time she gave an order. Not as a ghost, not as a victim, but as the woman who now employed him. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I will need your services. But not today. I have to go somewhere. Please wait for my call." She turned to a stunned Caroline. "Thank you, Caroline, for everything. I will call you. Tonight." "Ilara, where are you going?" Caroline asked, bewildered. Ilara didn't answer. She walked. She walked right past the Bentley. She walked past the uniformed driver. She walked past the line of black SUVs that were clearly Harrison's security detail. She walked to the edge of the curb, into the throng of confused and frantically filming reporters. "What is she doing?" one of them whispered. "Is she refusing the car?" Ilara ignored them. She looked down the street, raised her hand, and put 2 fingers in her mouth. A fweet, a sharp, piercing, and profoundly unladylike whistle, a trick she'd learned from her neighbor Miguel for hailing a cab during rush hour, cut through the din. A block away, a yellow cab, der J38, with a dented rear bumper and a cracked tail light, swerved from the middle lane, cutting off a limousine, and screeched to a halt in front of her. The cabbie, a man with a grizzled beard, rolled down his window. "You whistled, lady. Where to?" Ilara opened the back door. The smell of old vinyl, stale coffee, and cheap air freshener hit her. It was the most comforting, normal, real smell in the world. "Ilara, wait!" David Hayes yelled, running up to her, his briefcase flapping. "You can't. What about the paperwork, the trust, the board of directors? What am I supposed to do?" Ilara turned, 1 foot in the cab, 1 on the pavement, and she smiled. It wasn't the small, tired, haunted smile of the ghost. It was a new smile. It was bright, and it was relieved, and it was, for the first time in 5 years, completely and totally free. She looked at the young, earnest lawyer who had, quite literally, changed her world. "You handle the paperwork, David," she said. "You're my lawyer, aren't you?" But, where are you going? He pleaded, the world's newest billionaire getting into a taxi. Elara slid onto the cracked seat. She looked at David, at Caroline, at the waiting Bentley, and at the stunned press. It's 2:55, she said, as if that explained everything. I'm late. I'm going to the Bronx. The Bronx? David whispered. I have to pick up my children from preschool. She pulled the door shut. Driver, she said, her voice clear. 181st Street. And please, hurry. I don't want to be late. The cabbie shrugged, hit the meter, and pulled out into traffic, disappearing into the chaotic, anonymous and beautiful river of the city. Back on the steps, David Hayes stood holding his scuffed briefcase, next to Carolyn Grayson and a man with a multi-million-dollar armored Bentley. They all just watched as the beat-up yellow taxi carried the new matriarch of the Grayson Empire home. What a story. It just shows that the truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, always finds a way to the light. Elara Vance walked into that courtroom a ghost and walked out a queen, not because of the money, but because her truth was finally heard. She didn't just win an estate. She won back her name, her identity, and the future for her 2 children. But what do you think? Was Richard's plan an act of a genius protector, or a cruel gamble that almost cost his family everything? What do you think will happen to Bella? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I read every single one. If you love stories of justice, high-stakes drama, and seeing the underdog finally get their day in court, then you're in the right place. Please, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Click that notification bell so you never miss a single upload. We have new stories coming every week. Thanks for listening.